dish pit at Meridian sat in the back corner where the air conditioning never reached, and that was where Hazel Doyle had spent the last 14 months of her life, up to her elbows in gray water, while the most celebrated kitchen in Chicago hummed and clanged 6 feet behind her back. She didn't mind the heat. She minded that nobody ever turned around. She was 24, narrow through the shoulders, with hands that had gone permanently soft and wrinkled at the fingertips from the spray nozzle. She wore the same black rubber apron every shift, the one with the cracked strap she'd fixed with a zip tie, and she tied her hair back with whatever rubber band she found on the prep table that morning. Most of the cooks knew her name. The chef did not. To Garrett Voss, the man whose face was painted on the side of a building 2 blocks over, she was simply the dish kid, a sound he made in passing without looking, the way you'd swat at something near your ear. What none of them understood, not Voss, not the sous chef, not the line cooks who liked her and bummed her cigarettes she didn't smoke, was that Hazel could taste a plate from across the room. Not literally, of course, but she could watch a sauce go out under the pass lights and know, from the way it caught the heat lamps, whether it had been pulled 30 seconds too late. She could smell a stock turning before anyone else flinched. She had a thing in her that nobody had given her and nobody could take, and she had learned a long time ago to keep it folded up small and quiet, because the world did not reward girls like her for knowing more than they were supposed to. She had grown up moving, 6 foster placements by the time she was 13, 2 of them she didn't talk about. The one that mattered was the 4th, a tired woman named Coralie, who ran a house on the south end of Toledo and fed 9 kids on next to nothing, and somehow made every single thing taste like it had been made on purpose. Coralie couldn't read past a 4th grade level, but she could braise a chuck roast until it surrendered, and she let Hazel stand on a milk crate at the stove and stir, and she said things like, "Taste it, baby, your tongue knows more than the recipe does." That was the whole of Hazel's training. Coralie, a milk crate, and later the public library on Michigan Street, where she checked out the same battered Escoffier 11 times until a librarian finally just let her keep it. She worked a diner through high school, then a chain steakhouse, then talked her way into the Meridian dish pit by lying about a culinary degree she didn't have and praying nobody checked. Nobody did. Why would they check the dishwasher? So she washed dishes, and she watched. And here is the part that mattered, the part that would, in time, blow the roof off Garrett Voss's whole carefully built kingdom. For the last 4 months, the most talked-about sauce in the city of Chicago had secretly been hers. It started in October. Meridian's signature was a smoked short rib with a red wine and black coffee reduction, a dish that food writers used adjectives like transcendent about, and it had begun, without warning, to come out flat, thin. The bottom had fallen out of it. Voss tasted it on the line, and his face went white, then red, and he screamed at the sauce cook, a sweet, anxious kid named Theo, until Theo's hand shook so badly he could barely hold the spoon. They tried everything. New wine, new beans. They blamed the supplier. They blamed the burners. Voss had a tasting menu being photographed for a national magazine in 2 weeks, and his signature dish tasted like wet pennies, and he was losing his mind. It was Theo who brought a ramekin of it back to the dish pit, near tears, at 1 in the morning after a brutal service and said, "Hazel, you got a good tongue, right? Everybody says. Tell me I'm not crazy." She tasted it. She closed her eyes. "It's not flat," she said. "It's too clean. Somebody changed the coffee, didn't they? You're using a lighter roast. It's got no floor under it." She tasted it again. And whoever's reducing it is pulling it at a boil instead of a bare simmer, so the wine's gone harsh on top. You want it sullen, low, and slow, till it's almost sulking. Then a knob of cold butter off the heat, and she ran her tongue against the roof of her mouth, a half-teaspoon of fish sauce in the whole batch. Not enough to taste, just enough that your brain thinks meat before your mouth does. Theo stared at her like she'd spoken in tongues. The next night he tried it. Dark roast, bare simmer, the whisper of fish sauce, and the sauce came back. It came back better than it had ever been, deeper and longer and more haunting, and Voss tasted it on the line and threw his arms in the air and shouted that this was the dish, and clapped Theo on the back so hard the kid stumbled and never once, not for a single second, wondered where the answer had actually come from. Theo tried to tell him. Hazel made him stop. "Don't. she said in the walk-in, gripping his sleeve. Please, he'll think I'm trying to climb over somebody. I need this job. I just need the job. I just need the job, Theo. And Theo, who was 19 and afraid of his own boss, let it go. So the magazine ran the photo. Meridian's untouchable short rib, the caption said. Chef Garrett Voss at the height of his powers, and in the dish pit, behind the wall of steam, a girl with zip-tied apron straps read it on her phone during her 10-minute break and felt something in her chest she didn't have a word for. Not pride exactly, closer to the ache of standing outside a warm house in the cold, looking in through the window at a table set for somebody else. She told herself she didn't care. She was good at telling herself things. The night that everything changed started like every other Thursday, which is to say loud and fast and already behind. But there was a charge to it, a tightness in the way Voss moved, because that night the woman coming in at 8:30 was Diane Castellano. Everybody in the kitchen knew the name without being told. Castellano had written for the Tribune for 19 years and now wrote for somewhere bigger, and she had the kind of pen that could make a restaurant or quietly bury it, and she did not announce herself, and she did not give him second chances. Voss had been trying to get her through the door for 2 years. A regular had finally made the introduction. She was coming with 3 guests, and she had requested the full tasting menu, and if it went the way Voss needed it to go. Meridian moved from very good Chicago restaurant into the conversation that included words like national and destination, and the kind of money that let a man like Voss open a second place and a third. He had not slept. You could see it. He moved through the kitchen at 4 in the afternoon, touching everything, tasting everything, screaming in a low-controlled hiss that was worse than the regular screaming. He fired a prep cook at 5 o'clock for bruising the herbs. The whole kitchen walked on glass. And at 6:40 the thing happened that no amount of screaming could fix. Theo went down. It came on fast. He'd been gray and sweating since lunch, insisting he was fine. And then somewhere between the second and third ticket of family meal, he set down his spoon, said he needed a second, walked into the alley and threw up everything he had. Food poisoning or a virus, it didn't matter which, he couldn't stand. His eyes had gone glassy. Marisol, the sous chef, took one look at him slumped against the dumpster and called him a car and sent him home. And then she came back inside, and the two of them, she and Voss, stood at the sauce station and understood at the same moment what it meant. Theo was the sauce cook. Theo made the reduction, the short rib, the dish Castellano had specifically heard about, the dish the whole night turned on, lived and died on a reduction that nobody else in that kitchen knew how to make right, because the secret to making it right had never actually belonged to the man who got the credit. I'll do it, Voss said. I trained him. I'll do it myself. He did not say it with confidence. He said it the way a man says a thing he's trying to make true by saying it. And Marisol, who had worked under Voss for 6 years and knew exactly what he could and couldn't do, said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. He made a batch. He tasted it at 7:15. Hazel, 8 feet away in the pit, watched his face over the steam, and she knew before he did. He'd pulled it at a boil. The wine had gone harsh on top. There was no floor under it. It was flat, the exact flat. The wet penny flat that had nearly destroyed him in October, and the woman who could destroy him for real would be sitting at table 9 in 75 minutes. He made another batch. Worse, his hands were shaking now too, the way Theo's used to. He dumped it down the drain and gripped the edge of the stainless steel and breathed like a man underwater, and Marisol put a hand on his shoulder, and he shook it off. Find me somebody, he said. Call Theo, get him on the phone, walk me through it. Theo didn't answer his phone. Theo was face down in the back of a rideshare halfway to Pilsen with his ringer off. And that was the moment. 7:31. The kitchen gone quiet in the bad way. The line cooks pretending to be busy. The whole night sliding toward a cliff. That a voice came from the dish pit. A small voice. A voice that had spent 14 months learning never to make a sound. I can make it. Nobody moved at first. They weren't sure they'd heard it. Then Voss turned around, and for the first time in 14 months, he actually looked at the girl in the black apron, and his face did something complicated and ugly. What did you say? Hazel's heart was going like a bird against a window, but she'd already said it, and you can't unring that. So she pulled off her rubber gloves and let them drop into the gray water and said it again. I can make the reduction. I know how it goes. The real way. The fish sauce, the simmer, the cold butter off the heat. I know it. Boss laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a man whose entire self-image had just been threatened by the dishwasher in front of his staff 90 minutes before the most important table of his career. The fish sauce, he repeated. Slow, dangerous. Who told you there was fish sauce? Nobody told me. I figured it out. In October, when the sauce died. She was shaking, but she kept going, because there was a thing happening in her chest that was bigger than the fear now. When it went flat and everybody was losing it, Theo brought it back to me and I told him what was wrong with it and how to fix it, and he fixed it. And that's the sauce that's been going out ever since. That's the sauce in the magazine. I'm the one who... Stop. Boss's voice cracked across the kitchen like a dropped pan. The line cooks froze. Don't you dare. You think because you read about my food on your phone, you understand my food? You wash dishes. You have never cooked a service in your life. You were going to stand there and tell me, tonight, of all nights, that my signature dish, that my name is on, was invented by the girl in the dish pit. I'm not saying I invented it, Hazel said quietly. I'm saying I fixed it. There's a difference. And I'm saying I can fix it again right now if you let me, because nobody else in this room can, and your guest is coming, and you're out of time. The truth of that last part landed in the kitchen like a stone in a pond. Everyone felt it. Marisol looked at the floor. The line cooks looked at Voss, and Voss, Garrett Ross, whose face was on the building, who had clawed his way up from a community college culinary program and 3 restaurant failures and a divorce, and had finally gotten to the lip of the thing he wanted his whole life. Garrett Voss looked at a 24-year-old dishwasher offering to save him, and he could not stand it. He could not stand it. Get out of my kitchen, he said. The room went silent. You're done. Apron off. Get out. I'm not going to be extorted by... No. Get her out of here, Marisol. Marisol didn't move. Chef. Now. And here is where the story could have ended, the way these stories usually end, with the underestimated girl walking out into the cold with her zip-tied apron in a plastic bag, vindicated by nothing, while the man with the building keeps his building. Hazel actually started to untie the apron. Her fingers were on the cracked strap. She had been thrown out of enough places in her life to know the choreography of it, the way you go quiet and small and let the leaving happen so it hurts less. But Marisol stepped forward. Marisol Reyna had been a sous chef for 6 years and a line cook for 9 years before that, and had stood silent through a great many things she'd regretted, and something about watching this particular thing happen, on this particular night, with this particular girl, broke something loose in her. Chef, with respect, she said, and her voice was steady in a way that made everyone listen. She's telling the truth. Boss whipped around. What? In October, when the sauce died and you almost lost it and you wanted to fire Theo. Marisol didn't blink. Theo told me. He told me the night it came back. He said the dish kid figured it out and made him swear not to say anything because she was scared you'd think she was reaching above her station. I didn't believe him either. So you know what I did? I went back the next week when you were off, and I made the reduction the old way, the way you trained us. No fish sauce, simmered the way you do it. And then I made it her way, and I tasted them side by side. She paused, and I poured the old one down the drain, Chef, because hers was the one that's been going out ever since. I've watched her. She fixes things back there. The stock you thought turned in November, she pulled it before service and you never knew. She's got the best palate in this building and she's washing your dishes. The kitchen did not breathe. Boss stared at his sous chef like the floor had opened. You, and you didn't tell me? She asked me not to, and you, Marisol said very quietly, are exactly the reason she had to ask. It hung there. Every cook in that kitchen was looking at the floor, but every one of them was listening with their whole body because they had every one of them at some point, swallowed something true to keep the peace with this man, and they were watching what happened when somebody finally didn't. Boss looked at the clock, 7:41. He looked at the empty sauce station. He looked at Hazel standing there with one hand still on the strap of her apron, half untied, frozen. He was not a good man in that moment. But he was not a stupid one either, and the thing about a cliff is that it doesn't care about your feelings, and he was 90 seconds from going over it, and the only rope in the room was being held by the person he'd just thrown out. "If you're lying," he said, and his voice had gone strange and low, "if you waste my product and you can't deliver, you don't just lose this job. I will call every kitchen in this city and you will never plate a single thing in Chicago as long as you live. Do you understand what I'm offering you and what it costs?" Hazel let go of the apron strap. She retied it tight. "Move," she said. "You're in my station." Years later, the line cooks who were there that night would still talk about what happened next. The way people talk about a storm they drove through and survived. They would say she didn't hurry. That was the thing they always came back to. The whole kitchen was vibrating with panic, and the dish kid moved like she had all the time in the world, like the clock was a thing that happened to other people. She tasted the wine first, straight, a splash in a spoon, and nodded to herself. She found the dark roast coffee in the back of the dry storage where Theo kept it, behind the lighter beans Voss thought they were using. She built the reduction from the bones up, the wine and the coffee and the aromatics, and the long, patient, sullen simmer, low and slow till it's almost sulking, and when Marisol moved to turn the flame up, Hazel said no without looking, and Marisol stepped back and let her cook. She worked the rib too, checked the smoke on it, found it under-rested, pulled the tray and let it sit, because a short rib needs to relax before it'll give you anything, the way a person does. She tasted the reduction at 8:10, closed her eyes, reached past Theo's station for the fish sauce, measured a half teaspoon into the whole batch by eye, the way you salt your grandmother's soup, by feeling and not by reading, tasted again, took the pot off the heat, dropped in a knob of cold butter and swirled it off the flame until it went glossy and thick and caught the light like something alive. Then she held the spoon out to Garrett Voss without a word. He tasted it. He was a man who had built his entire life on his palate, who had been told since he was 20 that his palate was a gift, and he tasted the dish that bore his name made correctly for the first time by the person who had actually figured out how to make it correctly. In his face, the cooks who were there all describe it the same way. His face just sort of fell open. All the armor came off it at once. For 1 second, he wasn't the chef on the building. He was just a man tasting something true. "Where did you learn this?" he said. It came out almost like a whisper. "A woman named Coralie taught me to braise on a milk crate when I was 8, Hazel said, already plating, already moving to the next thing, because there were 3 more courses coming, and a critic at the door. The rest I taught myself out of a library book." "Plates up, chef. You want to run it, or you want me to?" Diane Castellano was seated at 8:31. Hazel cooked the entire tasting menu from Theo's station, with Marisol calling the pass and the line cooks moving around her like she'd always been there, because the truth is, the kitchen had known for 14 months and had only been waiting for permission to say so. Course after course went out, the mussel course with the saffron that Hazel adjusted because the supplier's threads were weaker that week and nobody else had noticed. The celery root soup she finished with a grate of nutmeg that wasn't on the recipe because the cream was richer than usual and it needed lifting. And the short rib, the real short rib, the sullen and haunting and impossible short rib, which went out to table 9 at 9:50 under the heat lamps catching it exactly right. They watched Castellano through the pass window. She was a small woman with reading glasses on a chain and a face that gave away nothing, and she ate the short rib slowly. And then she set down her fork, and she sat back, and she was quiet for a long moment, and she said something to her guests that nobody in the kitchen could hear. Then she asked to see the chef. Voss froze. The whole kitchen looked at him. He took off his apron with hands that weren't quite steady, smoothed his hair, started toward the door to the dining room, and then he stopped. He stood there for a second, half-turned, in front of his entire staff. And whatever happened in him in that second, nobody will ever fully know, because the inside of a man is his own country. But the people who were there say he looked at the door, and then he looked back at the dish kid wiping down her station, and something in him that had spent 30 years building a wall of his own name simply got tired. "Doyle," he said. It was the first time he had ever used her name. He didn't know he knew it. He'd heard it 1,000 times without listening, and there it was in his mouth when he needed it. Come with me. Chef. She wants to meet the chef, boss said. I'm not going to lie to Diane Castellano in my own dining room. Take off the apron. Come on. Hazel followed him out into the dining room, into the warm gold light, and the low murmur, and the white tablecloths, blinking like a person coming up out of deep water, and Castellano looked up at the two of them, at the celebrated chef and the young woman in the food-stained chef's whites Marisol had thrown her, and she waited. And Voss said, and this is the part the cooks could never quite believe, the part that made the whole story worth telling. Voss said, Ms. Castellano, the short rib you just ate, I want to introduce you to the person who actually makes it. Her name is Hazel Doyle. She's been washing my dishes for over a year because I never bothered to find out what was standing behind me. The dish you came here to write about is hers. I'd be a liar to take the credit, and I've taken it long enough. Castellano took her glasses off. She looked at Hazel for a long time. Then she gestured to the empty chair at her table and said, Sit down, Miss Doyle. Tell me where you learned to cook. So Hazel sat down at a white tablecloth for the first time in her life, in a restaurant she had only ever seen from the dish pit, and she told a woman with the most feared pen in Chicago about a milk crate and a library book and a foster mother named Coralie who couldn't read a recipe but knew that your tongue knows more than the page does. And Castellano listened and made small notes, and at the end she said only, Well, that was the best thing I've eaten in 2 years, and I've been doing this a long time. I look forward to seeing what you do next. And she meant it as the highest thing she knew how to say, and Hazel, who had been thrown out of more places than she could count, understood for the first time in her life what it felt like to be let in. The review ran 11 days later. It did not say what Garrett Voss had spent 2 years hoping it would say. It said something he hadn't expected at all, which was the truth, all of it. Because he had handed the truth to Diane Castellano on a white tablecloth, and she was not a woman to waste it. The piece was titled The Woman in the Dish Pit, and it told the whole story. The flat sauce in October, the fish sauce, the magazine that credited the wrong person. The night Theo went down and a 24-year-old self-taught cook stepped out of the steam and saved a career that had never once turned around to look at her. Sight, it became one of the most shared food pieces the paper had run in years. Sight, strangers wrote letters. People came to Meridian and asked quietly if Hazel was cooking that night. Voss could have buried her after that. He had the power to. Instead, and people are complicated, and a man can be both small and capable of growing, sometimes in the same week, he made her chef de cuisine. Real title, real money, real station, her name on the menu under the short rib. He did it partly because Castellano was watching, and the city was watching, and it would have looked monstrous to do anything else. But Marisol, who knew him best, always said there was something more than that in it. She said the night he tasted the real sauce and his face fell open, some part of the wall came down for good, and a man who has spent his whole life being told he's a genius found out at 50 that the genius had been washing his dishes, and instead of letting it crush him, he decided slowly, imperfectly, with some backsliding, to be the kind of person who could be glad about it. Hazel ran that kitchen for 3 years. She brought Theo back and made him her sous. She instituted a rule that nobody at Meridian, not the dishwasher, not the porter, not the kid who took out the trash, was invisible. Every single person got tasted, got asked, got turned around for. And when she finally left, it was to open her own place, a small, unglamorous storefront on the south side with no celebrity name on the building, where the food was honest and the staff was treated like human beings, and there was a milk crate by the stove that nobody was allowed to throw away. She called it Coralie's. So here's the thing worth sitting with. After the lights come up and the kitchen goes quiet, the world is absolutely full of people standing 6 feet behind the people who get the credit, in dish pits, in back offices, in the second chairs and the support roles, and the jobs nobody photographs. People with milk crate educations and library book degrees and palates the world never bothered to test, kept quiet and folded up small because somewhere along the way they learned that knowing more than you're supposed to is dangerous when you're not the one the room is built for. We walk past them every day. We let them wash our dishes and fix our sauces and save our worst nights, and we never turn around. Because we've decided in advance that the answer can't possibly be standing where it's standing. The only difference between Garrett Voss and most of us is that he got caught. He got caught on the one night it counted with the one person who wouldn't let it slide, and he was lucky enough, or finally brave enough, to do the one thing almost nobody does, which is to turn around and say her name, not mine. That's the whole story, really. A man who turned around. A girl who, when the door was being held open for once, walked through it instead of telling herself she didn't care. So the next time you're tempted to decide what someone is from where they're standing, go find out. Turn around, ask the quiet one in the corner what she thinks. You have no idea who's behind you, holding the only rope in the room, waiting 14 months for somebody to finally look. I keep going back to the moment Hazel retied that cracked apron strap instead of walking out the door. She had every reason to leave. She'd been thrown out of enough rooms in her life to know the choreography of it, and a smaller person would have taken the exit and called it dignity. But she stayed, because staying was the harder and more honest thing, and I've come to believe the whole shape of a life turns on choices exactly that small. What strikes me most isn't that she was talented. Talent is cheap. The world is full of gifted people who never get a single thing for it. What saved Hazel wasn't only her tongue, sharp as it was that for 14 months she did honest work in a corner where nobody was watching, fixing a stock no one knew was turning, correcting a sauce and asking for no credit, holding to a standard when there was no reward for holding it. Nobody films the dishwasher doing the right thing at 1 a.m, but the decency you build in the dark is the only kind that holds when the lights finally come on, and when her one night arrived, she was already the person it required. And here's the cause and effect I can't unsee. Garrett Voss spent 30 years building a wall out of his own name, and that wall is exactly what nearly destroyed him, because a man who can't bear to be wrong can't bear to ask for help, and the night he needed it most, he almost went over the cliff alone. Hazel had the opposite habit. She'd spent years teaching herself out of library books and off a milk crate, under a woman named Coralie, who told her that her tongue knew more than the page. Learning like that, quietly, without an audience, is what put the answer in her hands when it counted. The understanding you gather when no one's clapping is the only understanding that's actually yours. But none of it would have mattered without the nerve. Marisol had to find her own to contradict her boss in front of the whole kitchen. Castellano had the nerve to print the truth instead of the flattering story, and Hazel had to swallow the fear of a lifetime and say 4 words, "I can make it," knowing she could be ruined for them. Real grit isn't the absence of that fear. It's the decision to speak while your heart is going like a bird against a window. So I don't tell this to make you ache over a dishwasher. I tell it because the 3 things that carried her are available to all of us today for free. Do right where no one can see you. Keep learning when there's no applause. And when your one moment comes, be brave enough not to flinch. Hazel had all 3 the night it mattered. The only question worth asking is whether you'll have built them before yours.